It's a beautiful Saturday morning here in Coleraine, and I'm just about to enter the offices of the Chronicle and Constitution, sadly now up for sale. It's the first time I've been in the building in several years. It's a building I frequented for 47 years, 47 very happy years in the printing industry. This brings back many happy memories. The front office where Liz McElroy and Anne McCormick used to work here, and in my early days I would have come into the building about 6:45 a.m. in the morning, come through here and made my way out into what was the old jobbing department where we had the small printing presses. There was one electric light, it was, the switch was here. You switched that on and I made my way across the floor between the printing presses. It's all been utilised and revamped, of course, but in my day it was a printing jobbing office, and made my way over here where the control panel was, and bear in mind there was only one light behind me. I made my way to the control panel and I switched the handle down, as we call it, the handle down on the control box, and that kick-started the dynamo. And once the dynamo had reached a certain light, because all the lights were still on, I pushed it up and the dynamo took over because all the lights in here were DC. The whole building was self-sufficient. When we had made the pages up the following week, we would disc them, as they called it in those days, and remelt the metal and start all over again from a Monday morning. But basically, what happened here was, you can see this has been bricked off. That was a large driver belt that was attached to the dynamo, and here is the control panel that used to control the dynamo, full of dials and handles and so on and so forth. And the man in charge of the whole system was Harry Shields, the head printer. And Harry was a well-known bowler in the town, a well-known gentleman in the town, and that was one of his main jobs, was to make sure that all the electricity DC was in order throughout the day. I'm now going to go through these doors into what was the old Rotary press room. These doors have been here since I started in 1969 and they're still here. Of course, the bolts are new. This is the Rotary press room. It was a Hoe Rotary press. It was something similar to what they had in Belfast, if not identical. And as you can see, the concrete, the new concrete in the floor was the bed of the old Rotary press. And here up on the ceiling, we had the hoist where we raised the bales of paper to do the printing on the press. They were roughly that width, and they weighed, I think, nearly a ton. Some operation. Over here, again, where you can see the concrete has been filled in. This was where the engine that ran the press was housed. It was a single piston gas engine, and it ran the press through a belt system, and the belt was about that width. Anytime it backfired, the printers had to walk the belt to reposition the piston before we could start printing again. And of course, being a single piston gas engine, we relied on the town gas, and this is the pipe works that brought in the town gas. There used to be a regulator here, but it's gone now, and that kept the press moving as we printed in the early hours of the morning right through to about 3 a.m. So we didn't really interfere with the rest of the town gas users at that time. Over here we have, and it's still in place, what we call the roller rack, and this is where all the printing rollers that were used to print the paper were housed. Both the ones that were in use through the week, they were cleaned here and hung up again, or the spare ones in case anything happened to rollers. Without the rollers we can't print. This is the rack, and it was all full of rollers. Being a printing press and printing using paper and having to rejoin and reload reels throughout the print run, this was what was a store where we used to grab all the waste paper and just throw it in here. Out of the way, tidied, it didn't interfere with the printing press. It was sat there, and then come Monday morning we had people come and collected that for waste. So everything more or less was reused or recycled at that particular time. Again, I'm approaching doors that were here when I started. They're still here, and this was where we prepared a lot of the plates for the actual printing. This was the main area for producing the plates and taking them outside in preparation for going on the press. We had a large oven here which kept the lead molten, and then a system of pulleys and pistons where we pulled it down, it brought the lead out, cast the plate, brought out here, the surplus lead was trimmed off, and then over to this side here, it sat inside like a gouger, and that made the plate the proper depth for printing. Outside here was where a friend of mine, Danny Galt, used to be stationed, and Danny would have trimmed up all the excess lead off the plate in preparation for going on the press. I'm now going up the stairs into what was the old production room. Many a time I went up these stairs, and quite often in the early days we had to bring the molten lead from the caster. We had to carry it manually up the stairs here for the linotype machines to use. Now going up into the stairs into what was the old composing room in the old days, and there were two linotypes to my left, there was one to my right, there was a linotype over here and two linotypes here, and there was over on this side, in this corner here, was where a gentleman called David Fallas, who was the foreman of the jobbing department at the time, he would have had all his cases of text and type over here in this corner. I can remember it well. Archie McSparn sat there. Next to Archie was Tommy MacDonald and Brian O'Connor, who both left shortly after I joined and formed Impact Printing. Over at the far corner was Harry Evans. Next to Harry was Wally Chestnut. Ronnie Ferguson sat here. And over here was an old Model 48 that Charlie Ragg sat at. Everybody in those days was encouraged to do something for the newspaper. Ronnie Ferguson had a bowls column. Charlie Ragg also contributed to a bowls column. Ronnie also had a golf column. Archie was shuttlecock. He dealt with the badminton. And everybody here was encouraged to do everything for everybody, and with the main aim of getting a good paper out every week. We'll go through now to what was the old editorial department. This part of the building in those days was the editorial department for Morris McAleese and Jim Donachie and good reporters of that ilk. They started off here, and of course Hugh McGrattan, who went on to become the editor of the Chronicle, started off in the Constitution. Next to this we had the editor and the deputy editor of the Constitution, Tommy Roycroft, Bob Atchison and Morris McAleese. Bob Atchison, of course, was the editor of the Constitution. Go through here, and this was where Tommy Roycroft was based. This was Tommy's office. There's nobody in here but Tommy, and Tommy was an excellent journalist, first class. The next room here was where the editor, Bob Atchison, and Morris McAleese were housed here. Again, this was their office, and this is where they turned out an awful lot of the copy that made the Constitution the largest weekly newspaper in Northern Ireland at the time. When I started, the Constitution circulation was roughly around 23,500 copies per week, compared to the local papers here now, which I think are dwindled down to below 3,000. Going through here, we went another corridor. Of course, in those days, we were very safety conscious, and we had fire doors. And we got through the fire doors into the next part of the corridor, which is down here. In latter years, this was the office of the advertising manager, Sterling Pollock, who started off, when I was started off here, he started off as a printer, but very quickly graduated through skill sets into becoming the group's advertising manager. Next door to Sterling, we had the editor of the Chronicle, Mr. Yule Troy. When I say the editor, he was the main editor, but the real editor was Hugh McGrattan. Yule was in charge of all editorial content, being the brother of the owner and an owner himself. We go down the corridor again, and the next room we go into, this would have been Ivan Russell's room, who owned the Constitution at the time, but sadly passed away just before I started. And then after the amalgamation, when the Chronicle and the Constitution amalgamated in the early 70s, this was the office of the owner, Mr. Robert Troy, a very fair and a very forward-thinking manager. As we come up the corridor, we'll take a wee detour down in here to what we called the Clisograph room. This is where, it's a bit of a mess now, but this is where the photographs that appeared in the Constitution were made. They were made on small, thin aluminium plates, which were then backed up on lead bases and cast along with the rest of the plate. And this is how we made photographs for the printing. Down here was a very specialist little room for William Stewart. Willie Stewart was a mechanical genius, and here he devised a broken down linotype machine specifically for making headlines, and also what we could cast the column rules here. And Willie made that out of no linotype, a mechanical genius. Now going into what was the camera room. In the early 70s, the Chronicle and Constitution, who had amalgamated by that time, they left the letterpress section of newspaper production and joined the ever-growing, increasing world of offset printing. And this was the camera room, operated by Danny Galt, where we cast negatives, and then from the negatives we made plates through here. From here they went to the press room, which was now round the corner. This was a marvellous opportunity for the newspaper to progress. We could now do 32 pages in one run, and we had colour on the front, the back and the two inside pages, which we never had before. So it was an amazing time for all concerned in the newspaper industry here in Coleraine. The amazing thing about that transformation was we stopped producing newspapers on a Friday morning using letterpress. The following Monday we went offset, and the staff had to retrain themselves, and they'd done a very good job. The first week was long. I think I was here along with the rest of the staff from 8 a.m. on a Wednesday morning through to 5 a.m. on a Friday morning. But as time went on, we brought the time back, and we got more proficient in what we were doing. Of course, in the early 70s, it was a time of change here in the newspaper industry, and the owners at the time, Mr. Troy and his brother Yule and his brother Cyril, they owned it at the time. They decided that we'd bring a new paper out in Ballymena. So what we done was we took some of the circulation off the Northern Constitution, and that gave us a good start in Ballymena for the Ballymena Guardian, which at a time became a rival to the Chronicle in terms of being the largest production in provincial newspapers in Northern Ireland. It was an exciting time for the newspaper industry, and the man I think that really drove the Ballymena Guardian to the top was an editor called Maurice O'Neill, a man who never stopped, a fantastic editor and one of the old style, and one, unfortunately, in an age of clock watchers, we'll never see the like again. Well, that's a quick rundown of a building which holds so many memories for me, and I met some very, very, very good friends here, lifelong friends in the trade, and it's sad that the building is now up for sale and there's no longer newspapers being produced here in this part of Coleraine. And of course, there's no longer printing in Coleraine. The current newspapers are printed in the Irish News in Belfast, which is another sad thing, that we've lost our printing press here in Coleraine. And the way newspapers are going at the minute, all titles all over Northern Ireland are under threat from social media.